Hello. Today we start in John chapter 19. Then Pilate took Jesus and had him flogged. The soldiers twisted together a crown of thorns and put it on his head. They clothed him in a purple robe and went up to him again and again, saying, "Hail, King of the Jews!" And they struck him in the face. So, cover your ears if you are faint of heart, but Jesus was scourged. Scourging is when someone gets whipped, but the whip has sharp pieces of bone, metal, or glass interwoven in it. This would just tear up the flesh. If you ever hear the term "by his stripes" in the church, this is what that means. Even Dio knows this. You can see his stripes, but you know he's clean. Jesus always deserved a crown, but the one he got made him bleed. They dressed him up like a king to mock him. The Mark version actually uses the word homage. It is indeed possible to pay homage sarcastically. They didn't know that they were actually beating up the King of the Jews, the King of the world. In some instances, ignorance is not bliss. It's a sin. Let's move over to Mark 15:20. And when they had mocked him, they took off the purple robe and put his own clothes on him. Then they led him out to crucify him. A certain man from Cyrene, Simon, the father of Alexander and Rufus, was passing by on his way in from the country, and they forced him to carry the cross. The Romans didn't do this to be nice to Jesus, they just didn't want him to die before he was crucified. The ultimate humiliation was to die on the cross. And the reason they probably got this Simon guy to carry the cross was because he was not a Jew, and not long before the Jews nearly rioted, so they were just trying to calm the Jews down as much as possible. The reason we know who this guy was is because his son Rufus was probably an early church founder mentioned in Romans 16:13. The early church founders consisted of people around the world. That's because anyone around the world can see the truth. Unfortunately, anyone around the world can deny it as well. Let's move over to Luke 23:27. A large number of people followed him, including women who mourned and wailed for him. Jesus turned and said to them, "Daughters of Jerusalem, do not weep for me. Weep for yourselves and for your children. For the time will come when you will say, 'Blessed are the barren women, the wombs that never bore, and the breasts that never nursed.' Then they will say to the mountains, 'Fall on us,' and to the hills, 'Cover us.' For if men do these things when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry?" This crucifixion parade was common where a lot of people would follow, but this crowd was probably larger than any before it. No one was more loyal than the women of Jesus' life. His disciples were no help. Most of them fled. One of them followed at a far distance, and only one was at the crucifixion. I guess that's why he's called the Beloved. But all of Jesus' women disciples were beloved. Then Jesus doesn't really give them good comfort. He warns again of the fall of Jerusalem. We've talked about it before. It was really bad. To me it seems very strange that he would mention it here, but I think it's because seeing these women crying here gives him a flash forward to the wailing that will happen in that time. Only about a dozen women were crying here, but an entire city would cry on that day. 2 other men, both criminals, were also led out with him to be executed. When they came to the place called the Skull, there they crucified him, along with the criminals. One on his right, the other on his left. We'll cover the 2 criminals next week, but Jesus has now made it to where he would experience his final moments. A place called the Skull, also known as Golgotha. It's kind of crazy that the greatest thing to happen in the universe was so horrific. See you next time.